on this episode of Clear the Air.
So there was 10 kids and my mom and dad.
In a
Volkswagen Bug.
Oh, bug?
Bug.
Not a bus.
No,
a bug?
A bug.
You know, there's the word for that is clown car.
Get my arm chopped off, and getting an arm chopped off is a little more drastic than losing a tooth or getting a tooth pulled, but it's still the same thing. And having a fake tooth put in, that's just like having a fake arm. I'd like to have my arm be as real looking as possible, but I'd rather have my real arm. And I went home and I'm like, my arm's broken. And my dad looks at it and yep, sure is. And I said, well, can you put a cast on it? He goes, no, I'm going to Salt Lake. I'll be back on Monday and we'll take care of it then. And I'm like, welcome to another episode of Clear the Air Podcast. I'm your host, Nate Jones, here with Shad Slaughter today.
Hey, everyone. Glad to be back.
Well, thanks for coming back, finally. You know, I kind of got into this business that I'm in because of my dad. And my dad is a family physician, and you know, growing up, he was a physician in a small town in Idaho. By small town, I think, if I remember right, there's 3,200 people in the town now. And so 50, I don't want to say how old I am, 40, 50 years ago, it was a much smaller town. And there was really only one or two doctors in the town. And, you know, so my dad was the town doctor, and that's actually really what he wanted to do. And we wanted to do an episode discussing how medicine has changed, how I perceived my dad practicing medicine as a child. And I'm trying to, you know, come up with some good ideas and some good stories to tell. I'm not finding any, but I'll try to find one.
Before we jump into that, can I tell one quick one about your dad?
Yeah,
a quick story. First time I met Lon.
Wait, tell me what it is before we record.
No, you'll like this. First time I met Lon Jones, I was going to a conference, a medical conference, and he was coming out, and we were meeting in Memphis, Tennessee. And so I picked him up from the airport, and he comes out. He's got this nice beard, a hat, like a kind of a explorer hat, a leather satchel. And he's got his shirt tucked in, his white button shirt, and his khakis with sandals. And maybe except for the sandals and the lack of a whip, he looked exactly like what I pictured Indiana Jones. He was like a real-life Indiana Jones. And the best part about it is I spent that weekend calling him Dr. Jones, because it's Dr. Jones. And I felt like I was on Indiana Jones 2, the Temple of Doom, where the little kid the whole time was like, Dr. Jones, Dr. Jones. Maybe I'll do that without the accent. Dr. Jones, Dr. Jones. Anyway, that was my first experience with your dad, and I have to say this: as I've gotten to know him more and know about him, he legitimately is probably the closest thing to a real life Indiana Jones there is, just with his travel and his interests and just the breadth of stuff he's done. So I have a lot of respect for your dad.
But he's not an archaeologist.
He's not, but he has a wild interest in archaeology and anthropology and medicine and.
He does?
He's traveled to Iran to look into the history of Iran.
Well, he went to Iran because he wanted to go and, now I can't remember, the Zoroastrians. He wanted to go over there and look at the Zoroastrian shrines and temples and whatever, their buildings, and learn a little bit more about their history, which
is archaeology, I think.
That's sociology. I don't know what it is.
Anyway.
But that's actually a whole other thing, because that's interesting if you ever read that. That's the story of Christianity, but 300 years earlier.
Yeah. But going back to it, you mentioned, your dad being a doctor, a small-town doctor. Like, why is that so interesting?
Well, I don't know any other thing. I mean, to me, it's interesting because that's what I grew up with. So it's, I enjoy going back and discussing through the mirror of, or through the lens of, 20 years down the road. Okay, 30. Okay, 35 years down the road. Going back and looking at my childhood, and I know that as a child growing up in Idaho, I was like, boy, I hate it here. This place sucks. But, I look back on it now, and I have a lot of fond memories from that place. But having my dad be the town doctor, I don't know anything different, so I don't know how to put that into a.
You can kind of maybe compare it with your experience with doctors that you deal with outside of that, right?
World of difference. But I'm hoping that is a world of difference. But, if we want to talk about the difference between a small town country doctor in the 1970s and 80s to what we have in America today, I mean, you're talking about, the Sahara and actually not the Sahara. You're talking about the jungle of the Amazon jungle compared to Antarctica. I don't think you can get any more opposite, can you? I mean, it's so messed up. But I guess we could say is what's really driving that change and what's allowing it to happen. And I think a lot of it, before we started recording, we were discussing insurance. I think a large part of it has to do with our health and human services. That part of our government that is actually pushing it that way, allowing it to go that way, encouraging it to go that way. And it may be that there's outside forces that are pushing on health and human services that are causing those things.
Well, I have their mission statement right here, so.
Well, go ahead and read it for us.
Okay, so the mission of the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services is to enhance the health and well-being of all Americans by providing for effective health and human services, and by fostering sound, sustained advances in the sciences, underlying medicine, public health, and social services.
So in other
What's
words,
wrong with that?
I'm trying to understand this. In other words, they've tragically failed in their mission statement for the last 40 years, 50 years, in my opinion. I mean,
What are some examples of those failures?
well, the failures are the incidence of practically every kind of disease has gone up. The incidence of practically everything has gone up, and they went from a wide range of stuff to now everything is vaccine centric, and we don't see, and we've discussed this in some of the other podcasts, but we don't see public health agencies, which all fall under Health and Human Services. They're not going out and actually implementing a lot of what they learn. The Health and Human Services, they have a lot of money that they put and they spend on researching ways to improve healthcare, and they spend hundreds of billions of dollars trying to learn things, and then they leave it up to the pharmaceutical companies to go make a bunch of money off of that rather than just implementing a lot of the cheap things that they could do. A great example of that is they helped fund some of the studies a quarter of a century ago, longer than that, 30 years ago, where they showed that chewing gum with xylitol helped reduce tooth decay and reduce upper respiratory infections. How much money have they spent since then trying to find other ways to prevent tooth decay compared to implementing gum chewing programs that they know work to help arrest tooth decay?
What do you think drives that decision to abandon something that they know works to go after something different?
Probably because it's human nature to always want to find something better and put off till tomorrow what you could do today.
Okay. I think what I'm hearing you say is that, their mission sounds good, but they're failing because the approach is kind of a one-size-fits-all solution, right? Like, you have a large population, you have a myriad of different health issues that affect that population, and it's easier to try and find one solution per issue versus understanding that everybody's an individual and there might be different therapies that work for different people. But that we're not fostering that environment. Instead, we're saying, no, this is the issue and this is the only therapy or protocol that we allow for that. And I think it's exacerbated by insurance that says, well, if they have this, then we will pay for this, and we won't pay for this, or we won't pay for this. And so we've kind of taken out this, I don't know, customization or understanding the patient out of the whole thing.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think you're right on the money right there. You work with some doctors and they're like, well, the protocol is to do this, and all I ever think of is, I didn't work anywhere to get a protocol made. Why are you using someone else's protocol on me?
Do you think the doctors are somewhat complicit in this because of liability? Like, if they do what's accepted and what is generally told as the way to deal with something, they mitigate risk. Whereas if they look at something that may be not as widely accepted, they expose themselves to litigation and issues.
Oh, of course that is. They see that all the time. I mean, I hear stories about it all the time that's why they do what they do. Is it's more risk mitigation than it is working with the patient to get a good outcome. And most of the doctors want to do what's best for their patient, but in the back of their mind, they're always, what's the protocol?
They have families, they have practices they have
Yeah.
to protect. So going back to your dad then, how was that different, do you think, for your dad in a small town in the 70s? Like, what did his kind of relationship with the patient and practice look like?
Dude, I was 8 years old. How am I going to know that answer?
We gotta fill a podcast.
Why don't you ask that to my dad?
That'd be a great question for your dad.
Let's ask that question to my dad.
Lon, what do you think about that question? Now insert his answer here.
No, but one of the things that in growing up with him, there were things that he would say, like he used a lot of saline. He mixed up oral rehydration therapy for us. So if we ever got sick, the very first thing we knew we had to do was go drink some joy juice, it's oral rehydration. If you just Google it, it's a sugar water with some other stuff in it. I don't know what else is in it, but it
Pediacure, whatever that.
that's the
Pedialyte.
concept. But now it's not Pedialyte anymore. Now they have it. It's a sports drink for adults now.
I saw that.
But you would give everybody this oral rehydration. I remember I just don't remember getting sick that much, which is really bizarre as I look back on it, because we used to, we'd be out playing and we'd get thirsty and we would just go down to the ditch and stick our head in the water and drink, which as I think back on it, I can't believe I'm still alive.
Unless there's that thought that if you challenge your immune system at a young age, you build a stronger immune system for the rest of your life.
Well, my immune system has been well challenged, let's just say that. Because we would go out and swim in the ponds, and my dad would freak out because, we'd be out swimming in the ponds and there'd be a dead cow floating around somewhere. We'd be like, hey, there's a dead cow in the pond. Can you get it out?
Do you know what type of issues your dad dealt with the most?
No, I know. The stories that I remember were about women giving birth, and we would be waiting on. I remember we wanted to go to Disneyland, and my dad was like, "Well, we'll go to Disneyland. We'll go to California and visit your cousins, and go to Disneyland as soon as so and so gives birth." And so, I remember I was in class in school, and I think I was in 4th grade. Maybe 5th grade or something, but and I remember somebody coming in and saying, "Oh, so and so had her baby," and I'm like, "Yes, I'm going to Disneyland." No, but I'm trying to remember if that was the trip. I think we actually took a van down that time, but this is back in the 70s. There was one time where we made a trip from St. Anthony, Idaho to LA, and we did it in a Volkswagen Bug. And
obviously not 14 kids at that point.
There weren't all 14, but I think I was there, so there would have been, and I'm old enough to remember it. And so I'm going to say that I was probably 6 or 7. And so there was my mom, and no, the twins were born. So Martin, Debbie, Patty, Hinkley, Rachel, Jeffrey, Nathan, Vixie, Michael, Michelle. So there was 10 kids, and my mom and dad.
In a
Volkswagen Bug.
Oh, Bug?
Bug.
Not a bus.
No,
a bug?
A bug.
There's
and
the word for that is clown car.
But I just remember it was me and Jeff, behind the back seat, there's that little luggage area.
Yeah.
Me and Jeff, my brother, we were in that. And then you had the 5 girls that were older than us sitting in the back seat. And then I don't know where Vixie would have been, but Michael and Michelle, the twins, where my mom was holding them in her lap while we're cruising down the highway, going down to L.A.
And for all of those that are younger, seatbelts were not always like a thing. My mom was showing me a picture. My grandfather had this giant Cadillac, and we go down to St. George. And there's a picture of me sitting on his lap in my diapers with my hands at 10 and 2, hauling down the highway in his giant Cadillac sitting on his lap. So safety was the considerations for road safety back then were a little different than they are now.
Well, back then the speed limit was only 55.
Fair point.
Nobody gets hurt at 55, do they? No, I'm kidding.
Yeah. Well,
I'm
they say
kidding.
it's not the speed you go; it's how quickly you stop that does the
That
damage.
is true. That is true. So, anyways, so getting back to the topic, the mission of the United States Department of Health and Human Services is to improve the health. And I think I mentioned that I thought they had a huge failing, and I'll use an example, and it's something that I've discussed before. That in 2000, the Surgeon General came out with this Surgeon General's report on oral health in the United States. And in that study, it showed that by practically every marker, measurable outcome, the incidence of tooth decay was on the rise. The incidence of, the cases of bad oral health was actually growing. It was getting worse and worse. And I don't even know what they suggested in that made sense. And I went back and looked at that a little while ago, and they mentioned tobacco use, they mentioned drugs, they mentioned alcohol. The one thing that was curiously incredibly absent from that report, I mean, they did mention it once or twice, was actually sugar. Okay? They didn't really mention sugar, which was the number one culprit of bad oral hygiene. I mean, yeah, smoking tobacco plays a part into it. Smoking weed might play into it.
But I'm guessing at that time you could look at the growth of soft drinks, and it's probably similarly.
Yeah, it was going up, exactly. By every measurable point that you can make in oral health and hygiene, we're worse off now than we were in 2020. I'm not in 2020, in 2000. And even in 2000, they were pointing out that they were worse than they were in 1980. So what's happening from 1980 on? Our oral care has just gone downhill. And what's Health and Human Services? I mean, we just came out of a pandemic, and it made all the media all around the world. I mean, just everybody went crazy about it. But we've had an ongoing silent pandemic for 50 years or longer, and it's tooth decay. And we know how to solve it. We know how to end it. But Health and Human Services isn't doing anything to help us do that.
And it seems that all of the innovation in that time, or maybe not all, but a majority of the innovation in that time was reactive to the problem, fixing
In
the
dentistry.
issue in dentistry.
Oh, yeah.
Right. It's like advancements in caries, fixing caries or tooth extraction or prosthodontics where they're adding teeth. Or,
I think the biggest thing where they focused a lot is actually, and we've had this discussion, but it's actually in, what do they call the white stuff? It's not amalgam, it's porcelain.
Right.
Making it so that when you get a filling,
you're not doing the
cosmetically, it's not as unappealing, so that it looks better, which I agree you should. I mean, if I get my arm chopped off, and getting an arm chopped off is a little more drastic than losing a tooth or getting a tooth pulled, but it's still the same thing. And having a fake tooth put in, that's just like having a fake arm. I'd like to have my arm be as real looking as possible, but I'd rather have my real arm. And I think that the field of dentistry, I think that they're really going and just making sure that they're getting better fake arms.
Right.
They're making sure that their implants are looking more. They're making them now out of diamonds. They're making them out of, what do they call it, zirconium. And
so if you look at the scales, and you got prevention on the one side and reactive or post issue on the other side, the scale is heavily tipped on all of the innovation and money and everything driving kind of the reactive side of it. And the prevention side, it seems that it's underinvested, and not just underinvested, it seems that it's highly speculative. You have to make incredibly expensive and expensive studies and everything to prove something to even get any kind of movement there.
And what's sad about it is that you can put a new, zirconium or something like that and get a new lab, and it's easier to put that on the market than it is to put a better prevention product. But the issue is that most of your products that work in prevention, in hygiene, which is what we're talking about, you can't make any claims for. And historically, going back 150 years, even when the FDA was formed, the soap companies lobbied to be kept outside so they weren't considered drugs. But the definition of a drug is anything that prevents an illness, which soap prevents an illness, toothpaste prevents an illness. Whether or not it has fluoride in it, it prevents an illness. Hygiene, and so you have this overlap, and so people in the hygiene space have to be very careful of what they say, or the government gets mad at them. And we probably should encourage our congressional leaders to address this and come up with better guidelines so that people that are in the hygiene business can actually say what their products do. Because right now they can't. I mean, soap companies can't come out and say, hey, wash your hands and you're going to stop the spread of illnesses. Right. People in toothpaste that sell toothpaste can't come out and say, hey, brush your teeth and you're going to get fewer cavities unless it has fluoride in it. If it has fluoride in it, they can make that claim. But I can make a very solid argument that brushing your teeth with a toothpaste that doesn't have fluoride in it is nearly as effective as brushing your teeth with one that does have fluoride. So what other ways can we do to make sure that Health and Human Services is stepping up their game?
Well, I was going to ask, and again, this is, this would be an interesting question for Dr. Jones specifically.
No. You got to do it with the accent.
Dr. Jones. Dr. Jones, Dr. Jones. I literally did that for a whole weekend. And once I realized that, Lon has a pretty good sense of humor, I, did it in front of him. Dr. Jones, Dr. Jones.
I didn't realize my dad had a sense of humor.
Well, I thought he does. So going back to your dad and the time and place that he was practicing medicine, obviously, I guess some assumptions here. An assumption is that his resources for dealing with severe issues were probably much more limited than doctors in bigger cities, and certainly modern day doctors. Do you think that played into the way he dealt with patients and pushing good habits and good recommendations because his ability to react to or the patient's ability to be treated for severe issues was a lot less?
I would expect that to be the case, but again, I don't. That's a question you'd have to ask him. And
write that down. I want to interview Jordan.
And I think we will. I think we're going to have him on here, and I think the next time I see him, I'm trying to think if I'm going to see him before I see him in Finland. That's only a month away. Yeah. Maybe I won't. Anyways, maybe I will. Yeah. But, the nearest big hospital, the nearest emergency, trauma, whatever, I think Rexburg had a little emergency room, but if there was anything serious, you had to go to Idaho Falls and even Salt Lake. I know that I had a younger sister that had some health issues, and for her to get him taken care of, she had to come to Salt Lake, which is 5 hours away. Right. And back then it was 55 miles an hour, so 6 hours. Every time she had to come down here every week from Idaho, 6 hours, and they'd come down every Thursday or something like that. In fact, funny story. I broke my arm, and as a child, I was riding a bike through a grain field and crashed it into the irrigation ditch, and I was carrying a post hole digger, and it broke my arm. And I went home, and I'm like, my arm's broken. And my dad looks at it, and he, yep, sure is. And I said, well, can you put a cast on it? He goes, no, I'm going to Salt Lake. I'll be back on Monday, and we'll take care of it then. And I'm like... And I think he wrapped it in some newspaper and some tape.
So did if people broke their bones, did he do casts?
Yeah.
That's crazy. So he's not just a family doctor, but he's doing gynecology and childbirth, right? And fixing bones.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's pretty. And now it's very highly specialized.
Yeah, no, it's highly specialized. No, I just had this conversation. This is actually an interesting conversation about the cost of medicine. My nephew or my niece, I'm trying to remember which one it was, had to go have their appendix taken out. I think it was my niece. Goes down and has their appendix taken out. And they were all up here. My older brother died, and so the whole family was up here for his funeral. And we were talking about some of what had happened in the last couple of months, and my brother-in-law was like, had to get her appendix out. I can't remember who it was. I probably shouldn't say a name. Don't mention a name. Erase the name. Anyways, my one of my nieces or nephews had to have their appendix taken out, and my brother-in-law was sitting there, and I said, "Well, how much does that cost?" And he said, like, he goes, "Oh, like 110 grand." And I was like, "What?" And he pulls up on his phone all these bills for him to have his child have the appendix taken out. They went to the hospital and they looked at it and they said, "Yeah, we might have to do it. Go home, come back tomorrow." But anyways, they showed us all the bills. It wasn't burst, but at the end, and he didn't care because his insurance covers it. And I asked my dad, and I said, "Dad, when you took out an appendix, how much did you charge for that?" And he was like, "I don't know, $200."
He did appendix surgery too?
Yeah.
That's amazing. I mean, and I want to be clear, like, specialization is amazing because you probably get an increased level of care on cases that are maybe a little bit above, a general doctor, but
I will go to a non-specialist and pay $200 as opposed to a specialist and pay 100 grand any day of the week to get my appendix out.
get your appendix out.
For 100 grand, I think I'm going to do it myself.
I'm picturing your dad. And for whatever reason, I always picture your dad with a whip, just because he is Indiana Jones in my mind. But
No, it's because he whipped us as children.
Yeah. I'm picturing your dad, and I'm picturing the relationship that he would have with his patients, and how much different, not just him, but any kind of small town doctor at that point, where there was kind of no middleman in the relationship, right? It was the doctor and it was the patient. And now, your relationship with your doctor has the insurance is in the middle of that, where
Not just
everything
insurance,
has
but
to be filtered
politics.
through that. And politics, yeah. I mean, we heard stories of, in COVID of doctors making prescriptions that pharmacies would refuse to fill because of politics.
Yeah. The politicians would tell him, "No, you can't fill this."
Right.
So the doctor would say, "Hey, give my patient this." And politicians would say no. And that's, I mean, one of the things that I can tell you, though, is that even now, 30 years later, my dad hasn't practiced in that town in 30 years. I go back to that town, and the people, the older people that are there that knew my dad, they actually really speak highly of him, very highly. And that, I think that is a reflection of the care that my dad gave to them. I mean, I've even gone into, this was actually a funny story. Is I went up there once, probably 15 years ago. So I hadn't lived there in 25 years, and I left when I was a kid. And I walked into the hardware store, and I probably bought $400 or $500 worth of stuff. And it was Wadsworth, in case you're still, I think it's actually closed down now. I don't know where it is. But I walked in there, walked up to the front counter, and he goes, "Well, you just want me to put it on your bill?" And I'm just like, "What do you mean put it on my bill?" And he goes, "Yeah, I'll send you a bill." And he knew who I was. I hadn't been up there in 20 years. And I just walk in to go buy some hardware and some lumber to go work on my parents' house. And he just, "Yeah, you're one of the Jones kids. Tell Lon I said hi."
That's amazing.
But the thing is that people, you still go in there and people still speak of him with I want to say respect. They still remember him.
When did your dad practice there? Like what years roughly?
From 75 to 85.
Okay.
84, 85.
Decade or so?
Yeah.
Then did he go straight down to Plano, Texas from there?
No, he actually went down to, and the reason why is because you can't, you can't support. I don't want him to hear this because he'll get mad at me, or my mom to hear it. Anyways, my mom and him kept getting in arguments because you can't support a family of 14 kids on what a doctor makes in a small town. You just can't. And so he went down to Texas, and we moved down to Texas, and we were down there for 6 months, and he started working, and we all hated it there. And so
what
he ended
part
up,
of Texas, like Dallas? Or?
Yep, Arlington, right between Dallas.
Yeah.
Yeah. Huh. And then we moved to Michigan, and he worked up there for a year and a half. I did my freshman year in high school in Michigan, and we went to Mexico. Then he went to Texas, and he was working out west, and he went into ER work, so that he could work and be on the clock and then leave. and come home and actually spend time. And we actually went down and lived in Mexico City, which I think was the most phenomenal experience of my childhood. And we went down to Mexico City and lived down there for a year. And he would fly down, every other week or so, and then he would go back and work for a week. And that was a great experience. And we moved to Utah, which is where I graduated from high school. So
when did he move to Plano?
Plano? Where's Plano?
Is he not in Plano, Texas?
No, he's in Plainview. Plainview, not Plano.
All right.
Plainview's up in the...
I thought he was in Plano.
No, Plainview is up between Amarillo and Lubbock.
Got it. Okay.
Plano is down in central Texas.
Take two. So when did he move to Plano, Texas? So when did he move to Plainview, Texas?
He moved to Plainview. He started working out in Seminole and Plainview and Hale County, Hale Center, in the 80s. And that's when we lived here. My mom was going to law school. The kids were all getting older. Then my parents got divorced. I think a large part of that was that they were separated a lot. But they got divorced, and then he just continued living down there, and he's lived down there full time ever since. And my mom lives here in Utah. So
was his experience down there more? I'm not familiar with that area. Is that kind of considered small town? Was he kind of small town doctor again there? Or?
Oh yeah, I mean that's all he ever wanted to do.
Right.
I mean, once he went to medical school, that was all he wanted to do, and it was be a small town doctor.
Yeah.
And so to support a family, he had to go do something else. And once they were all older and gone, he just went back to being a small town doctor.
There was a lot of my youth, I wanted to be a small town doctor, probably because I was watching Northern Exposure. Remember that show?
No.
Doctor gets sent up to some small town in Alaska.
Oh, that sounded like a strip club to me.
It actually is on Beck Street. But I'm talking about the show Northern Exposure.
Where is it? You know the address?
Yeah. I used to drive by it. By it, not to it.
I didn't even know. There is one called Northern Exposure?
Yeah, there's a Northern Exposure and a Southern Exposure.
I knew the Southern. I didn't know the Northern.
Yeah. It was called Northern Exposure, right? Yeah, Northern Exposure. Dude, that's a great show. Oh,
I think we should do an episode with my dad.
Okay.
Just to have him. You know what I want is I want him to do an episode with Dr. Mackinnon.
So your father has a vast experience in medicine and treating all of these things in these towns. He's also written a few books.
Yeah.
A couple books. How many books do you know?
I don't know.
Oh,
A couple.
I would assume you've read them all.
I've read a couple.
So what's the focus of his books?
Usually, the complex nature of healthcare, and what I mean by that is
macro complex nature or like individual complex nature.
Both, because and he'll tell you it's the same. That the first book that he wrote that I read, and it was really a confusing book, and you have to read it. I had to. I mean, I'm not saying everybody, but you have to read it 3 or 4 times, and then you really still don't understand it that much. But it's called The Boids and the Bees, and what it talks about is the complex nature of the human body, and that's very relatable. The complex nature of everything. That the idea that medicine and the way that our government and the FDA have it to where you have one drug, one disease, one treatment, one outcome. If you want to do a study, you have one drug, one outcome. What is it that you want? What's your outcome? That's it. You can't have more than one outcome. You have to do a whole different study. And that is completely squashing the whole idea and the concept that the human body is complex, because the human body is incredibly complex. And if you use, let's say an antibiotic to treat a bacterial infection, you're not just treating that bacterial infection, you're killing off all the commensal bacteria in your body also. And so there's so many other issues that come up. And, it's like the whole butterfly thing. If you have a butterfly flap its wings, it causes changes everywhere else. If you, pull a fingernail, you might have changes somewhere else in your body. It is complex, and the fact that we don't acknowledge that it's complex, that we refuse to address it as a complex nature, just makes our healthcare system worse. It makes the way we respond to sick patients worse. There's a book that hasn't been published yet, but I had a chance to read through it and give some comments on it, and so it should be coming out pretty soon. But the author points out, I want to make sure I don't say anything that's of a secret nature. But one of the things that he points out in this book is that, if you go back 100 years, you would have these herbalists and these naturopaths and people, and they would use homeopathy and herbals and all of this other stuff, and they would use a wide variety of herbals and products to get a desired outcome. And by utilizing many things to achieve your goal, you never reach the toxic level of any of those being harmful to the body. And when you come out and you do this now with drugs, where if you have, you have a staph infection, well, you only use one antibiotic, and you have to use this much of it, and you're getting close to having other issues because of the overuse of that antibiotic, killing off your commensal microbiome. And we see that all the time in hospitals when they're using really strong antibiotics. Instead of using a lot of natural antibiotics, they just use one big strong antibiotic to try to kill it off, and a lot of people will get other nosocomial hospital-acquired infections. And but that's a book that's coming out. It's not one that my dad wrote. And when it comes out, I'll have the author on this podcast and have him talk about it. But that's something that, because of the complex nature of it, that comes from thousands of years of wisdom and people trying and seeing what works and what doesn't work. And as your practitioner, knowing and understanding you, where you live, your environment, having worked with you in a one-on-one environment for a while, hopefully, having a better understanding of what they're doing for you personally, not the one-size-fits-all that modern medicine is pushing on us. But that's really what the Boids and the Bees is about. And then the next one he wrote was, it was one that he wrote after he had actually invented the nasal spray, called No More Allergies, Asthma, or Ear Infections.
Yeah, that's the one I've read.
And really what that book talked about is that all of those things start in the upper airway, and even he as a physician hadn't really thought of it until he started utilizing this product in the late 90s. So he'd been a doctor for 30 years and never really thought about oral and nasal hygiene and how it affected the systemic, nature of the human body, which again goes back partly to that Boids and the Bees kind of a concept, is that it's all complex and interrelated. And we know now that your gut microbiome, your nasal microbiome, your oral microbiome, all of those are very closely related to your systemic health. But that was No More Allergies, Asthma, or Ear Infection. Then he just did a revised version of that. And he has another book that I'm not sure if it's published. I know that I've read it. I think it is published, but I can't remember the name of it.
Sounds like all these books, kind of the common thread is pushing back against the direction that generalized medicine was going in.
You know what? That's interesting. As I sit there and think about it, I agree with you. And I don't think that was his intent. I think that his intent was to simply tell people that there are options and that, we should look outside the box for the answer. And we should be careful putting all of our eggs in one, or all of our focus on one thing, and not having a broad, bigger picture look at healthcare.
Thanks, Nate, for letting me come on today. I'm excited to see Dr. Jones again, and hopefully we'll have an opportunity to ask him some of these questions.
Wait, you're going to see him? Are you coming with us to Finland?
I'll be in Finland. Yeah.
We, I guess he's joining. We're actually going over to Finland and having a little mini get-together of a lot of the doctors that are doing and have done in the past research. We're going to have Dr. Mäkinen and his wife, Pirkka Lisa. They're going to be there, and Dr. Cannon and Dr. Peldiak. And I've invited some other ones, but they chose not to come. They said they had family reunions. But anyways, we're going to have a little get-together over there and talk about some of the exciting research that's coming out about xylitol. There was another paper that was just published yesterday on the nasal microbiome and xylitol.
That's awesome.
So,
and we're going to do a few podcasts with those guests from Turku.
Yep. So you're going to get to see these guys, and hopefully they give us some good words of wisdom.
Yep. And my daughter will be joining us, who's been living in Turku for the last 2 months.
So just putting this out there, if anybody has any questions, email them to us, and I don't know where to email them to us.
pod.cleartheair@gmail.com.
And but if you have any questions for the doctors that have been doing research with xylitol for half a century, let us know, and we'll try to ask those questions. And I guess that's another episode of Clear the Air, and hopefully we've cleared the air a little.
This episode was hosted by Nathan Jones, co-hosted by Shad Slaughter, produced by David Monk, associate producer Matthew Davis. Video and audio were edited by Caleb Scoresby, research by Sabre Bills, graphics by Joseph Thornton, music by Augusto Diniz. If you enjoyed this episode of Clear the Air, be sure to follow, like, and subscribe so you don't miss out on the latest episode. Have a favorite episode? Share it with a friend or on social media. New episodes of Clear the Air are published weekly on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. Thanks for listening. We'll catch you next time.
Do I talk too much in these?
No.